So I am a breast cancer survivor myself, and my journey actually began when I was very young as a caregiver. My oldest sister was diagnosed with breast cancer when she was in her early 30s, and so I went with her to her doctor's appointments and saw everything firsthand of what it meant to go through surgery. She ended up swelling on a half of her body with her arms and her legs because of lymphedema setting in, and so being there to support her at the beginning of that journey, and I was also a caregiver her last few weeks of her life. And about 2 years later, after she passed away, was when my own personal doctor actually said, Lorinda, we need to start testing you about 5 years before your nearest relative was diagnosed with breast cancer. I was in my late 20s, and so I thought it was going to be just a simple preventative test, and the next thing I knew, I had over 20 different tests performed because they kept finding things that were anomalies. I had multiple biopsies and ultimately ended up having a lumpectomy in my late 20s and then had a bilateral mastectomy in my late 30s. And I just can't speak enough about the power of preventative care, because if I had not been diligent in discussing everything with my doctors, and if I had waited until I was 40, who knows what would be my life story.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about coming back to work. What was that experience like? What was the entry like?
Yeah. So I felt amazingly supported. I actually had a lot of complications in my recovery. So what I expected to be 6 weeks of medical leave and then returning, I actually ended up being on medical leave for 6 months because I had a stitch that reopened. So then I had a muscle that atrophied. I was delayed to start physical therapy. And I can't speak enough about the power of the caregivers who came into my life to help me during that period of time where I had to relearn how to cut basic fruit and vegetables and rebuild a lot of strength. And my job was amazingly supportive during that time. I kept reaching out and saying, I actually am still trying to rebuild myself. And so I can't really think about work right now. And they completely understood. And then when I was able to come back to work, I was able to be fully present because I was able to take the time that I needed to recover fully.
What would be some suggestions you would give to leadership or colleagues for people coming back after experiencing a diagnosis and or surviving cancer?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing is, like, sometimes empathy doesn't mean that you ask somebody explicitly how they're doing all of the time. And there are ways that you can show that you care without putting someone on the spot of having to trigger for them to share their emotions of how they're doing that day, because someone has good days and bad days. And so sometimes just saying, like, hey, do you need a hug, is a better way to give some support, or is there something that I can take off your plate, might be a helpful way to lend support without just asking somebody what might seem like a really helpful, supportive question of how are you doing, how are you feeling, but that actually can, like, trigger all of the emotions that are just under the surface and completely stop someone who's trying to compartmentalize and show up for work that day and send them into a completely different mindset.
What does breastcancer.org mission mean to you?
Yeah, I love the mission of breastcancer.org. I learned about them after my journey. I have now been 6 years cancer free, and the learning about breastcancer.org and the role that I've been able to play through JP Morgan Chase is that they provide vital tools with a community for caregivers. I remember a lot of my family and friends who were trying to support me, where they were trying to figure out, what do I need? How do I provide support? And they were very reliant on my doctors and the resources at the hospital, whereas breastcancer.org provides insight for patients and insight for caregivers, and a community where people can learn from one another and feel supported and ask those questions that they don't know where to go to ask them, and they're experts who can provide the advice, but also a community of people who are going through the same thing in real time. And I think that there's power in community. I think in today's world, a lot of us feel like we go through difficult situations and we might be the only person facing that situation. And breastcancer.org provides the community along with expertise that helps people navigate such a difficult journey.